confident that we will have a good quality debate, and importantly, the issues that I want to raise will be on the record. I'm also conscious, Mr Stringer, that a number of these issues relate to the business department, and the Minister is responding on, obviously, in his capacity as a Minister for Health and Social Care. But I do hope that any issues that are not within his remit and with which he does not feel able to respond, he will undertake to take forward with departmental colleagues. Now, many members, Mr Stringer, will have been introduced to medical cannabis by constituents getting in contact to tell them, as their MP, about the very real difference this form of cannabis has made or could make to their own or their families' lives. These testimonies, along with scientific study after scientific study, led in 2018 to my right honourable friend, the member for Bromsgrove, legalising medical cannabis and thereby ending the potential criminalisation of those living with or just trying to manage multiple sclerosis, cancer or epilepsy. And it was a significant step forward for patients. And indeed, last year, some 17,000 UK patients are estimated to have been prescribed Santivex, Nabilone and Epidiolex in the UK. And I'm sure many members of Parliament could tell a story from their constituents of what a difference such prescriptions have made to the quality of users' lives by easing agonising muscle stiffness, reducing chemotherapy-induced sickness, or as a therapy for seizures, especially for children. The legal changes of 2018 were also a significant step for the medical cannabis industry in the UK. And we should be clear that medical cannabis is just that. It is a legitimate industry and an industry of the future. Its products do not come from humid tin-foil draped sheds or sun-lamp-lit lofts. They come from laboratories and from facilities that are as controlled an environment as those which synthesis, for example, a vaccine. I know myself for this to be the case, having seen such facilities being developed in my own constituency firsthand. The medical cannabis industry is one of legal and professional standards. Rigorous regulators, approvals, licensing, inspections and almost endless specialist equipment, be it quantum sensors, microscopes or leaf barometers. Not to mention stringent safety and security protocols. It is not just the standards to which it is produced, but it's also the volumes which are of note. Some 59 hectares are harvested in the UK in 2021, producing 329 tonnes of cannabis for medical and scientific purposes. Of this, 213 tonnes were exported, more than half of the reported world total. Beneath, though, these impressive headline figures is the impact that this industry can have on local economies and local communities. And that is why I have been and remain very supportive of the development of a facility in my constituency by Hilltop Leaf. Too often, Mr Stringer, investment in new industries is funnelled into enormous singular developments captured by large corporate interests or goes straight into cities. Rural and agricultural communities, such as those I represent, often get overlooked, with seemingly only wind farms or tourism receiving investment. The medical cannabis industry is an antidote to this. In many ways, the growing of medical herbs, I feel, is a form of farm diversification, an evolution of horticulture, which builds on local strengths and local skills. As I hope the investments by Hilltop Leaf will demonstrate, with one of the largest greenhouses in the UK, medical cannabis can be a transformational impact to local communities. It will bring a variety of good jobs, horticultural, administrative, managerial and logistical, which I hope will anchor young people who often feel the gravitational pull of large cities for the want of opportunities in a rural area, such as the one I represent, which has seen the demise of traditional industries such as textiles. It could also meet nearly 10% of the UK's 2019 domestic need. But for all the successes of the UK cannabis sector to date, it could be so much more. Bureaucratic, legal, administrative, regulatory, medical, licensing and planning issues are all inhibiting the potential of this industry and hindering vital investment in rural Britain. Indeed, the overly onerous process it takes to receive licensing in the first instance has given me cause to worry about the development in my own constituency stalling. I'm afraid the UK approach to the industry is incoherent and insufficiently consistent. Yet, as medical cannabis can be prescribed, but only by specialists, and this is predominantly being done outside of the NHS, particularly in Scotland. So while I said earlier some 17,000 in 2021 received legal prescriptions for medical cannabis, but it is conservatively estimated next year there will be approximately 337,000 potential patients, and this could be many times larger should new conditions be covered. This is a state of legality, but inaccessibility. It is grossly unfair and contrary to the principles of our health service that those who can pay get private prescriptions or source the requirements from drug dealers, while those that cannot go without. All the while, whilst there are almost 24 million prescriptions for opioids in the UK. Those figures, in differential terms, are staggering, Mr. Stringer. As the potential savings for the NHS in prescribing medical cannabis have been detailed, with one US study showing a potential provider saving of 29% due to reductions in opioid dosage. And as I've said, in confirming the efficiency of medical cannabis in helping with certain conditions while stopping it from being readily available, we are pointing those who are desperate to these illegal markets. Do we really think patient safety is best served by criminal suppliers who provide a product of poor quality and which likely contains contaminants from the fashion in which it was grown? I certainly don't think so. And do we need to see the benefits for British growers, supply chains, jobs and tax revenues bypassed and instead go to criminals and smugglers both here and overseas? Clearly not. Not when the medical cannabis sector has a potential value to the UK economy of over £1 billion. Our incoherence also extends to cannabidiol, or CBD. We allow its purchase. Indeed, the UK CBD market is the second largest globally, worth £300 million in 2019. But our hemp licensing means that the flowers and leaves where CBD is found must be destroyed. As such, the CBD market fulfills its needs through overseas imports, and British supply chains do not benefit. Growers are necessarily forsaking the opportunity to yield a crop of £10,000 per acre compared to £400 for wheat because of this approach. Such yields would be a real boon for rural Britain. If the UK's regulatory, legal and medical frameworks were in line with those elsewhere, there could be estimated up to 100,000 new jobs of the future created, and good quality jobs too, Mr Stringer, as I have already set out. It's an opportunity that should be within our grasp, but unfortunately we do not seem at the moment able to take it forward. And I was disappointed when a fellow member on the 14th of November last year asked the Business Department about its willingness to take forward the approach to the medical cannabis industry as part of its medical sciences strategy and commitment for the UK to be a world leader in such fields. And unfortunately, the then Minister gave what I regarded as a very lukewarm and non-committal answer to that. Now, as I'm sure the Minister and all present this afternoon will agree, nascent industries need nurturing, and the medical cannabis sector is no different. Much like the plants this sector grows, the industry is seeking the conditions to grow. I hope the government would be minded to support this sector and the economic benefits it could bring, particularly to rural Britain. Now, this is not an ask and should never be considered with an ask for wholesale legalisation. That is a completely different debate. It is an ask for consistency and coherence for the industry and access for NHS patients to medical cannabis in the UK. We need the various strands in government to be stitched together to provide support rather than maintain a strange patchwork of overlapping and clashing components. Therefore, the UK government and the devolved administrations, where appropriate, should accept the need to review the prescribing process, medical guidelines, acceptable THC levels, and the overlapping legal and regulatory components. My specific ask of the UK government is that it should appoint a senior official to do so holistically and who would be mandated to engage directly with the industry. With coherent and consistent oversight, and by bringing the UK in line internationally, the medical cannabis sector could help get rural Britain, particularly constituencies like my own, growing economically. And in doing so, we could supply our domestic market with homegrown supplies and, even more importantly, relieve the pain and suffering of hundreds of thousands of our constituents if they were able to access the prescriptions which they need. Thank you.
This House has considered the economic contribution of medicinal cannabis. Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I, first of all, say what a pleasure it is to speak in this and to serve under your chairmanship. I particularly thank the honourable gentleman for Dumfriesshire, Clydesdale and Tydale for leading today's debate, and I believe for setting the scene so very well and very balanced, and certainly I wish to add some contributions. And in his introduction, the honourable gentleman referred to we all have constituents who have benefited from medicinal cannabis. Well, I have one. I'm going to speak of that lady, that young girl. She's not a lady, young girl, about her family, because I've seen at first hand, Mr. Chairman, just exactly what medicinal cannabis can do to improve health, lift the fortunes of a family physically, and also to give them that encouragement that they so much need. As my party's spokesperson for health, DUP spokesperson for health, these issues are very important to me, and I've seen very clearly firsthand the impacts that medicinal cannabis can have on people who are ill. And I wish to go on to discuss that. The sad issue being it doesn't work for everyone, but it certainly works for some of the ones that I'm aware of. There are success stories, but also a large proportion of people that this doesn't work for. But for those who are fortunate enough to see the results, this is a crucial treatment that can ultimately save lives. So it's for that reason I'm here today to celebrate that. Issues like these, Mr. Chairman, by their very nature, can sometimes be contentious. I think the right honourable gentleman set the scene well and gaining the balance that I would wish to see in his contribution. I can congratulate him for that, because I think that's been well presented, and sometimes sparks debate. But I don't think it can be argued that we would try anything if it gives someone a better chance of life. Mr. Chairman, there is never a debate on this topic that I don't highlight the benefit of regulated medicinal cannabis prescription by talking about lovely Sophia Gibson, a young girl of about 6 or 7 year old, had epileptic fits every day for all of her life. I have a photograph of her in my office where I sit and look forward to a wee photograph of Sophia when she was smaller. She's the daughter of Danielle and Darren. Sophia has Dravet syndrome, and it's incurable. She will continue to have those seizures until our wee body can no longer cope. But the fact of the matter is, medicinal cannabis is not the cure for her, as there is no cure, but the quality of life that young girl has today it has changed so dramatically. I can remember when the epileptic fits were such ferocity and such statistical numbers that it was impossible for that young girl to have a normal life. Today, her life has changed. Because of that prescription from the board that changed not only her life, but the life of her distraught parents. And those are the parents that I met first. From being in hospital each month, missing months of schooling at a time, this THC prescription has enabled her to attend school with the intensity and the numbers of epileptic seizures drastically reducing. I can recall the meeting that I had in this House with the then Minister, Mark Field, with Danielle, Sophia's mother. And the Minister was such a help. And I've said it before in this House, I'm going to say it again. He was such a help in trying to help Danielle and young Sophia and the whole family to move forward. And ultimately, through that Minister's help, Mark Field's help at that time, through the help of the assistance of the Health Board back home and the department here, Sophia was then able to be in the seat of medicinal cannabis, and her life changed. And that's what I see. I see a real difference, Mr. Chairman, on a young girl who was potentially looking at a life where it was going to get worse and worse and worse. I have a wee nephew. I often say this, I say it with regret because it wasn't available at that time, and did I no knowledge of it either. But my sister Joy has a one child. He has epileptic fits, and I often wonder, Mr. Chairman, if he had access to medicinal cannabis. I'm not saying it would have been the case, but if he had access to medicinal cannabis, would it have been possible to have changed his life? Obviously, now it's too late because he's had so many years of it that it's impossible to put life back. Now, Sophia still needs 24-hour care. She can also live a life with her family. It did my heart glad to see her travel, as she did just last year, with her family to Disneyland in Paris. So I'm not ashamed to admit that when I saw the picture of this, the family always bring the pictures in just to encourage you, and I think it's always good to see it because you can see the progress. You can almost pictorial see the progress. But the picture that I seen was Princess Belle dancing with Sophia, and it would not have been possible, Mr Chairman, without the blood, sweat and tears of her mum and dad, who would not cease until their daughter got the medication, their dedication, their commitment. As parents do, you do anything for your child, and that's a fact. And how right they are. And also, I have to say, for the Minister here, at that time, Mark Field, and for the Health Department as well. It would also have not been possible were not for the will of this House, to provide steps to the safe classification of this drug for medicinal purposes. Whilst I celebrate this victory, it also ensures that I support my colleagues in trying to secure access for more children like Sophia, and that is why I'm here today. When I seen this debate, I automatically said to Naomi, my scriptwriter and speechwriter and preparer of speeches, I says, I've got to be here for this debate. This debate's important to me. I've seen firsthand the improvement to Sophia's quality of life, and I want more people to be able to access this with that purpose. So I clarify this matter, Mr Chairman. It's very clear that I do. I'm not looking, and I don't think the Honourable Gentleman is either, by the way, in his country. I'm not looking for free for all. I mean a process that allocates it in specific circumstances as directed by the Health Department. So I don't think that we are currently there. There are so many companies, Mr Chairman, who are investing in cannabis plant products for healthcare because the benefits for those it works for are incredible. However, we do know that the UK is the world's biggest producer and exporter of legal cannabis for medical and scientific purposes. Globally, there is a rising trend in the legal production and use of cannabis for medicinal and scientific purposes. For example, Jazz Pharmaceuticals, which has offices in Oxford, Cambridge and London, manufactures the products Epidiolex, Sativex and Target Healthcare, which makes certain Bedrocan and cannabis oils in the UK. In 2019, a major US cannabis company has set up its European headquarters, guess where? In Belfast. And that's just only a few years ago. Colorado-based Mile High Labs, which is the largest extractor of cannabidiol isolate in the world, established its base in the Boucher Road in Belfast. So we have moved forward. The benefit of medicinal cannabis to individuals and their families, as well as the economic benefit that is starting to arise from this, is a reason enough to review their approach. I think that's what the Honourable Gentleman is asking for, and with that in mind, I support his request. And we are taking and to allow the wider production and the delivery within the strictest of frameworks, ever mindful of what I've said. I will be clear again, I'm not in favour of legalised cannabis in any other capacity than as a GP or consultant-led and within the strictest medical protocols. But I do believe that we can and we should help people and provide a safe and effective product for those who need it for specific reasons within the proforma. To conclude, Mr Chairman, and to thank again the Honourable Gentleman for introducing the debate, Sophia is my example as a young girl who has progressed where she can now attend school regularly. Her mum and dad, I met her at one of the fun days down in the Westminster Estate in Newton Ards just last year. What a difference I can see in that wee girl. The wee girl in the photograph in my office who at that time was having fits every half an hour, 45 minutes. Today, her life has changed and her parents' life has changed. So when it's given someone a chance at living, in her case, her best life with a debilitating condition, and that is so vitally important. And what I know each one of us in this chamber wholeheartedly support. Can we make someone's life better? I think we can. And sometimes when we do it, it's such a magnificent occurrence that it does leave a lasting effect upon you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr Stringer. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair. And may I also congratulate my right honourable friend for Dumfriesshire, Clydesdale and Tweedale for securing this debate and the way in which he has opened it. It is, of course, a pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman for Strangford too, and I agree entirely with him that if this were a debate about the wider use or the encouragement of the use or worse yet, the legalisation of cannabis for recreational use, then neither he nor I would be speaking in favour. We'd be speaking strongly, I know, against. But that is not the debate that we're having today. We're talking about the prescription of medical cannabis by doctors for use by patients like Sophia, my honourable friend's constituent, and indeed others. And I'll come on to my own constituent whose involvement in this process leads me to be here too. But I think it's worth recognising that the debate about whether or not we should prescribe medicinal cannabis medicines to patients who can benefit from them is a debate that has been resolved. We've had that discussion, and as my right honourable friend mentioned earlier, our right honourable friend for Bromsgrove made that necessary change to the law in November of 2018 so that such medicines could be prescribed within the law, and that medicinal cannabis was rescheduled under the law to ensure that that was a legitimate process. That was, in my view, entirely the right change to make. I argued for it at the time, and I was involved in that process. But the credit must more substantially go to my constituent, Alfie Dingley's family. Alfie is a young boy whose circumstances are very similar to the circumstances the Honourable Gentleman for Strangford described in his constituent's case. A number of seizures a day of very great severity, and there has been a transformational effect as a result of cannabis-based medicine for Alfie. And as a result, his family campaigned effectively and robustly for the change that we have seen, and they deserve huge credit for it. I'm delighted that Alfie's parents are here today, and if I may particularly mention his mother, Hannah Deacon, who has been campaigning not just for Alfie's benefit, but for the benefit of others who can also derive considerable change, beneficial change from these medicines. So we already have a change in the law to allow medicinal cannabis to be prescribed and to deliver benefit for those patients who can have it. But of course, all of us who thought that was a good change to make had rather expected that considerably more progress would have been made by now in making sure that medicinal cannabis products were made available to those patients who could benefit from them. And it is a profound sadness and matter of regret, and should be of concern, that there are only 3 NHS prescriptions yet made for these types of medicine. That cannot be right. And I hope that my right honourable friend, the Minister, will recognise that the logic of the legal change made in November 2018 was that we would make these medicines available to those who need them, and we are nowhere near that objective. But we have, as I say, crossed the significant Rubicon. We've made the decision that medicinal cannabis should be made available to those who need it. And it seems to me that we need to follow through on the logic of that decision. And the logic of that decision is not just that in a medical context we should make these medicines available to those that need them, but we should also support the provision of those medicines, and domestically too. And therefore the debate we're having this afternoon at my right honourable friend's instigation is to make sure that the logic of our decisions is followed through, and that the UK economy can derive the necessary benefit from those, in my view, sensible decisions. We know that medicinal cannabis will be produced somewhere, and of course we must want it to be in order to want to have those products available for prescription within the NHS and the broader healthcare architecture. Why then would we not encourage the production of medicinal cannabis in this country so that there can be a direct domestic financial benefit from it? It simply makes no sense to create a demand and then refuse to allow our domestic producers to meet that demand and instead import almost all of that demand instead. And of course, doing that isn't just a wasted economic opportunity. It has a direct healthcare effect as well. And that's why I think it is of benefit that my right honourable friend is answering this debate, because if we were talking to a DEFRA minister, we could talk about the benefits that these particular crops bring in an agricultural sense. If we were talking to a business minister, we could talk about the direct financial benefits that have been mentioned. But since he's here, we can also talk about the direct benefits to those receiving these medicines of a more secure supply chain. And this is not just a theoretical concern. So for Alfie Dingley and his family, there were periods of intense worry during the Brexit process when they were concerned about the security of supply of what Alfie needed, which was at that point coming from the Netherlands, and the disruption of that potential supply was evident and concerning.
and I would like to put on record my thanks to the Minister's predecessors who were able to intervene and to ensure that there was some security of supply, but that took up a good deal of ministerial time, and it did so because we were seeking to secure supply from overseas when we could so much more easily have been having that supply domestically. So this isn't just an economic argument, though I accept the points that my right honourable friend has made and I support them about economic benefit. There is also direct healthcare benefit in ensuring that we have domestic supply of these products. So, Mr. Stringer, I simply support the argument that both those who've spoken have made, because I think it's sensible to follow through on the logic of the decisions we have, in my view, rightly already made. And we must therefore want to see domestic supply supported. We must want to see that the bureaucratic obstacles that my right honourable friend rightly described in the way of securing that domestic supply are addressed. And I hope that my right honourable friend, in what he says in summing up this debate, will be able to reassure us that he and colleagues in other departments will be able to work together to make sure that that security of supply can be achieved, that those financial and economic benefits can be achieved, and most importantly, that patients who should derive the benefit of these medicines don't just receive them by prescription, but can be reassured that their future is secure and the supply of their medicines is secure, because we have developed a sustainable domestic industry in the production of medicinal cannabis.
Ronnie Khan, on behalf of the SNP.
Thank you very much, Mr Stringer, and I congratulate the honourable member for Dumfriesshire, Clydesdale and Tweeddale for bringing forward this debate today. I'd like to put on record that I'm a trustee of the charity Intractable Epilepsy. Our aim is to raise money to fund the purchase of medical cannabis for children with intractable epilepsy. Details are contained within my register of interests. And it's appropriate that this debate has been held on this date, the 20th of April. A happy 420 to everyone. Some people know what I'm talking about. In March 2019, the Health Secretary Matt Hancock reassured parents of children living with life-threatening epilepsy when he said medical cannabis would be made available on the NHS. Of course, this never happened. Instead, he threw the problem over the wall and left the health professionals to deal with it, and they haven't. I've raised the issue of the provision of medical cannabis numerous times, I think it's 36, in this place, and every time the UK government has ignored my plea and reverted back to their default position of cannabis is bad. Their lack of knowledge is evident by the way in which they confuse synthetics like spice and mamba with marijuana. And this is a background against which parents and guardians have constantly lobbied the UK government in order to provide medical cannabis on the NHS, and I have tried to support them as best I can. Clearly, we were wrong in our approach, and I apologise to those children and their parents for my shortcomings. I appealed to the moral or the ethical approach, and I appealed to this government who could repeatedly tell us they have a compassionate approach to governance. And what I've found today is that what I should have done is what the Right Honourable Member for Dumfriesshire, Clydesdale and Tweeddale has done, and made the economic argument instead. Because while parents struggle to raise the thousands of pounds required just to keep their kids alive, this government has ignored them. But once we start highlighting the potential for making money, the UK government's ears prick up. And I'm not criticising the Right Honourable Member. If that's what it takes to get the government to engage, then so be it. Because engage they must, because people are suffering needlessly. I went to great lengths in my budget speech to highlight the benefits to the UK government of supporting the hemp industry. And much of this argument is the same, because it's the same plant we're trying to grow. Where the UK government insists that cannabis is a drug in Class B of the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971 and MDA in Schedule 1 of the Misuse of Drugs Regulations 2001, and that all varieties are treated the same, then we are failing to understand that cannabis is a very complex plant with over 483 compounds. Because of the UK government's bias and ignorance, they have turned their back on the potential the plant has, and indeed the known benefits too. In fact, there are over 50,000 uses for the hemp plant. Medical cannabis is only one of them. Finding markets for hemp would not be a problem. So allow myself the indulgence of reminding us all of some of them. It's estimated that a medium-sized economically viable establishment would employ 120 people. When it was widely grown back in the 16th century, in those enlightened days of King Henry VIII, it was used to manufacture rope and canvas for the King's Navy. But now we know we can make clothing, shoes, biodegradable plastic, insulation panels, food, paper, biofuels, and medicine. These products will sell, they will be profitable, and the government could reap the benefits. But it doesn't end there. Hemp absorbs 22 tonnes per hectare of atmospheric carbon during its 4-month growing cycle. Hemp produces 4 times the biomass of the same-sized area of forest, making it far more sustainable source of material. Hemp doesn't need pesticides, insecticides, or fertiliser to grow in the UK. Hemp has natural antimicrobial properties, so it passively cleans the air in buildings. Hemp has a high capacity for moisture absorption, allowing for a controlled atmosphere within buildings. Hemp construction materials act as a long-term carbon sink. One £60 million investment would create a facility that's capable of growing 32,000 acres per year. That would sequester over 207,000 tonnes of CO2 per annum. That's the CO2 photosynthesised by the hemp in its 4-month growth. That doesn't include the carbon sequestered into the soil or the net effect of replacing high-embodied carbon products from international supply chains and their emissions. And, as a wee bonus, hemp regenerates the soil it grows in, so it would work well in crop rotation. It increases winter wheat and spring barley yields by 16 to 18% when they follow hemp in rotation. And it cleans groundwater. By that it means it's a deep root and root mass that absorbs residual pesticides and insecticides from the soils, preventing runoff into streams and rivers and therefore avoiding the costly remediation by the water companies to achieve UK drinking water standards. And the barrier to this industry raising the funding it requires is licensing. Licensing problems which, as far as I'm aware, the company mentioned by the right honourable member of Hilltop Leaf are currently banging their heads up against. They want to grow, they want to expand, they have built the facility. They cannot get a licence from the UK government to allow them to expand. And the problem with licensing is the categorisation of cannabis. To make the cannabis industry a success, the government only has to open its mind to the reality of what it is and distribute the appropriate licences to the appropriate growers. And that will only be possible if cannabis is recategorised. So while I welcome everything and anything that encourages the provision of medical cannabis, I would say the UK government's knowledge has to increase if it's to truly capitalise on the hemp plant and provide the good outcomes that are available. I would prefer that the UK government came to the table driven by a desire to provide medicine for people suffering from a range of conditions, and we will need a supply chain from private companies to do that. But if it's drawn closer by the lure of tax revenue, then so be it. But we can't wait any longer. The patients that require medical cannabis to help them towards better lives have waited far too long for this government to recognise their need and act accordingly. And finally, Mr Stinger, the argument that we need more research is no longer viable. The argument that cannabis is bad and we can't countenance its use is misplaced. Rather than standing on the sidelines, shuffling their feet, it is now time the UK government were proactive in funding and promoting the growth of the feedstock, the academic research, the production of the medicines, providing and promoting the necessary training for GPs to allow them to prescribe, and ensuring that the legal framework exists to allow the medical profession to carry out their duties for protecting them and their patients, which by my reckoning would mean the involvement of DEFRA, BAYS, Home Office, Health, and as there's no show without punch, the Treasury too. Minister, it's time to go to work.
behalf of the opposition.
Thank you, Mr Stringer, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship and to be here for this debate this afternoon. I take what the Right Honourable Member said about it being a late slot on a Thursday, but an important debate, and I'm certainly pleased that we've had time to have contributions this afternoon. And he very clearly outlined the case that this is a legitimate industry and an industry of the future. And he has asked the government for consistency and coherence in its approach to this industry. I wish him luck with the government having coherence on its policy towards many nation industries, but I think it's a point really well made about good standards of productions, about the importance of jobs, particularly in rural economies such as the one that he represents. And as I know many people here and people who couldn't be here this afternoon have spoken very movingly in the past about their constituents, as the Honourable Member for Strangford has today, and about the difference perhaps movement earlier would have made for his own nephew, and the Honourable Member for Kenilworth and Southam, and we welcome his constituents here today to hear this debate, as I know they have been for very many debates over the past few years. And again, he makes that very sensible point about the logic of the 2018 decision necessitating some action from the government, and particularly really worrying for so many families across the country about that insecure supply chain, which an industry in this country would of course help alleviate. And finally we heard for the Honourable Member for Inverclyde, who 36 times, but I know I work with him well on Select Committee. He is a very persistent campaigner on this and many other subjects, so he'll be here 37th and 38th time, I suspect. A huge amount of work in this area, and a historical trip on the importance of many of these plants for the wider economy, and the need for, again, the government to have some more knowledge about the logic of its decision-making to support the industry. And I know, but this is a debate about the economy. Points are really well made. And I think as we have the Health Minister here today, it is worth recapping, really, why we have not made greater progress since 2018, particularly for those campaigners who worked so hard, because despite that decision in 2018, the trials and the clinical research that would help the wider industry have moved at a glacial pace, so that only 5 people have been prescribed medical cannabis throughout the NHS in 2018. It is still ridiculously slow, and so many people are having to go private. And that's 5 years later is really totally unacceptable that so little progress has been made. So as we do have the Health Minister in front of us, I think it would be helpful if he can set out what steps he's taking to empower and accelerate research in this space. And you know, I hope he's not going to dodge the question to say it's simply about an issue for clinicians. The government does have a responsibility. He's nodding affirmatively, so we await his reply with interest. But there does seem to be a lack of urgency around this issue, which I do think is concerning. We know that people are suffering right now. We know, and we've heard again this afternoon, about children who are fitting sometimes up to 100 times or more, pushing those families to the brink of destitution in sometimes care, to access care. And we should be doing everything we can to support these people. Now, if research is needed for clinicians to feel comfortable prescribing, then that is important and incumbent on the government to support them. We need to see more streamlined clinical trials and better engagement with clinicians. We all don't want to be back here in another 2 years having a rerun of a similar sort of debate. So in 2021, the then Minister said, and I quote, "It will take time to generate further evidence and see the results of clinical trials. The Health Secretary and I are committed to doing everything in our power to accelerate this work." So if the Minister can update us today on where this work has got to, and if the government is any closer to finding a solution, I think that would be very welcome by people tuning in today and for the families here present. And finally, I'd be grateful if the Minister would set out what action he's taken to support people in the system right now, those who are paying thousands of pounds to access treatment and who are unable to live in extreme pain. There is consensus on this, as we've heard this afternoon. The debate's been had. A decision has been made, but we can and we really should be doing better. So I think in that spirit of consensus, we'd all like to see some progress from the Minister this afternoon.
Thank you, Mr Stringer. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon. And firstly, let me congratulate my right honourable friend, the member for Dumfriesshire, Clydesdale and Tweedale on securing this very important debate, which I know, held on any other day, would be considerably better attended, because I know from my own inbox and indeed members from across the House that I've personally spoken to that there is considerable interest in this area and on this issue. And although this is the first debate that I've responded to as a health minister on this very important topic, I do know that the House has debated medicinal cannabis at great lengths in the past. That have been very, very good and constructive debates, and I do appreciate the depth of passion shared by right honourable and honourable members across the House on this issue. I also recently met with members of the all-party parliamentary group on medicinal cannabis, and as referenced by my honourable friend, the member for Strangford, visited one of the sites of Jazz Pharmaceuticals to learn more about the industry, the applications of their product, the medicines, and the challenges that they face. But I also learnt about the huge opportunities that exist, not just for UK life sciences, for UK PLC, but of course, importantly also for our NHS and for patients. Now, I note that my right honourable friend's interest is largely a constituency one, talking about Hilltop Leaf, and he has long championed investment in Scotland, and in particular investment in rural and remote areas, where sometimes it has been a challenge in the past to attract certain types of jobs, certain high-skilled jobs, and this is an area of that, especially where they are accompanied with research capability. And my right honourable friend has eloquently and articulately made his case, and I am very much alive to the fact that this is a complex issue, complex issues that rarely have simple solutions. And I'll try to respond to as many of the points that he and right honourable and honourable members have made today as possible in the time which is reasonably substantial available to me. Rare, actually, in a Westminster Hall debate to have more than 7 or 8 minutes to respond. Now, my right honourable friend rightly pointed out that this issue crosses multiple government departments, from DCIT to Department for Health and Social Care, business, and of course, vitally also the Home Office, as has been alluded to, and also, importantly, NHS England too. So firstly, in response to calls to grow a UK CBD industry, and specifically on hemp farmers' harvest. Now, I'm straying somewhat out of my health remit for a moment, just to polish off some of these points as much as I have the bandwidth to do so. I understand that the Home Office has no plans to permit cannabis cultivation without a licence, and I know my right honourable friend pointed to the licensing programme specifically and the challenges there too, nor to remove the distinction between the industrial hemp regime and the standard cannabis cultivation regime. Now, I can't say more specifically on this, as I hope my right honourable friend will agree, it is well outside my area of knowledge or expertise and my brief. And but what I do understand, having done some rudimentary research and obviously my conversations with Jazz Pharmaceuticals, that this relates to plants being grown outside versus inside, and the use of leaves and flowers specifically. Of course I will.
On that point, the Mr. struggling to understand the extra group who just asked you about the APPG for CBD products, got a plan for legal and regulated UK hemp and cannabis sector. I'm more than happy to give him a copy later on.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that, and I will gladly take a copy on the way out. And I hope he'll excuse the fact that I'm not an expert in this field, but I'll very happily read that report as my weekend reading and sort of learn up on the subject. But I think what I will agree to, certainly, as my right honourable friend requested, that I take this up with my counterpart in the Home Office, and I know that he will also do so. Especially, I'll take away his points on licensing, which I think is an important one, and how the government can support those companies that want to invest here in the UK, or those who are here and want to invest further in their agricultural businesses by diversifying to get the licences they require to grow these products. Now, of course.
Yeah. Very grateful to him for giving way, and I think all of us understand that he doesn't speak for each of the government departments responsible in this area, but I know that he will take the point away from this debate too, that nobody here is likely arguing that there should not be licensing of this process. There are obvious concerns that need to be met by a regulatory intervention. The concern here is the fragmentation of the regulatory landscape as it applies to those seeking to grow these types of product. And so if he can help us, I'm sure he can help us by helping to coordinate better the way in which regulation is applied rather than seeking to remove it, which I don't think we're arguing for.
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for his intervention, and I think we're probably in violent agreement on this point. And although I can't specifically talk to the regulation or licensing side from the Home Office perspective, of the fact that we are, of course, talking about a controlled drug, much to my honourable friend's disappointment, but nevertheless that it is at the moment and likely to remain, I should hasten to add, a controlled drug. Turning more, as I will a bit later on, to the regulation from a health perspective, actually what is really important is we do have consistency and coherency in that, and that we treat these products in the way that we would any other medicinal product. But his point is well made, and I will, of course, raise that with Home Office colleagues. Now, more broadly on growing a UK CBD industry, I'm of course aware of the growing consumer CBD and wellness market. You only have to walk through any high street now to see CBD products advertised in windows, and indeed the major multiples, the supermarkets will sell products containing CBD. And I understand that, in fact, a government department I didn't reference, which is DEFRA, of course, which that the Food Standards Agency is taking action to regulate this particular side of the market. And that's important because, of course, it will help to protect consumers, which is vital, and ensure that only safe and high-quality products are placed on the market, and importantly, that consumers are protected against misleading health claims. You know, I'll just give you an anecdotal example. I was recently told about CBD products that are in aluminium cans, but I was told that actually the CBD remains on the aluminium and doesn't actually leave the product. But that's just one example. So it's a very complex area, and one that I don't want to delve too much into because that's very much a sort of DEFRA and Food Standards Agency lead. But I also know that the Food Standards Agency is also working closely with the Home Office on how these particular products relating to CBD are regulated in terms of their composition and the presence of any controlled substances. So this is very much a live issue, and I'm told that the Home Office has sought the advice of the ACMD, which is the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs, and I understand the government intends to respond to the ACMD recommendations on this matter shortly. Now, my right honourable friend also raised regulatory barriers. In fact, both of my right honourable friends raised regulatory barriers. And not that it needs a reminder for the House, but it's helpful perhaps for me to remind the House that cannabis-based medicines are controlled drugs and are therefore regulated by the Home Office, which is responsible for all controlled drug regulation legislation. And then there is the controlled drugs licensing regime that supports cultivation, research, and of course, where it crosses over into the health sphere, clinical trials in the UK. And this licensing regime enables the possession, supply, production, import and export of those controlled drugs to support industry, pharmaceutical research and healthcare. But of course, more and more of these products are being grown in the UK, including Jazz Pharmaceuticals, for use in research. Understand? Of course, yes, of course.
You're going to talk to ACMD. I'm just wondering, if this time when the ACMD make recommendations to the government, are you going to acknowledge those recommendations? Are you going to accept them? Because you've knocked them back a couple of times in the past, most recently been over nitrous oxide.
Yeah, my old friend tempts me to respond on behalf, and it always is tempting, to respond on behalf of another government department and another minister. But I mentioned it because I was saying my understanding is the government intends to respond to that report and those recommendations. I am not the responsible minister, so therefore it wouldn't be appropriate. But I will gladly point my honourable friend in the direction of the Home Office Minister that will have responsibility for responding and make sure that he has that opportunity to have that conversation with them. The point I was making on this is that the overall legislative framework on illicit drugs seeks to control harmful substances while enabling appropriate access to those drugs for legitimate medicinal research and in exceptional cases for industrial purposes. So an example I was touching on is Jazz Pharmaceuticals, for example, are, I don't believe this is any secret, are providing product for clinical trials here in the United Kingdom, which is something that I think we would all welcome. And I know that the legislation has recently been reviewed by the independent ACMD, which concluded that no legislative amendments are currently required, as there is not yet sufficient evidence that it needs amendment. Now, turning specifically to a key point of this debate today, which is cannabis for medicinal use, and this does fall very firmly within my sphere of influence, and I'm hugely moved by so many of the cases that I've heard about, and I'll come back onto the specific cases that my right honourable friends have raised today. These are really difficult because, as a health minister, my overriding priority must always be to ensure that patients have access to medicines that are proven to be safe and effective, and that is the biggest challenge. And it's why I'm committed to, and the Honourable Lady rightly challenged me on this, to galvanising research in this area, which is key to unlocking so much of this debate. And the prospect of a future where more licensed, and I put the emphasis there on licensed, cannabis-based products that are proven safe and effective can be prescribed on our NHS to help relieve suffering is genuinely exciting. That's where I desperately want us to get to, and get to as quickly as possible. But herein lies the problem, that there are clinical concerns that, having spoken with clinicians, that I share about the limited evidence on the safety and efficacy of the unlicensed cannabis-based products. And only in a few conditions have enough clinical trials been done to prove scientifically that the drug is safe and effective. However, and I want to labour this point, progress is being made. And turning specifically to the cases raised by my honourable friend, the member for Strangford, and my right honourable friend, the member for Kenilworth and Southampton, both Sophia and Alfie, I've got two young children myself. Of course, I'm hugely moved by these stories. The debate around medicinal cannabis often centres on children with difficult-to-treat epilepsy, for whom the law was changed under, I think it was my right honourable friend for Bromsgrove, when prescribing was made legal in November 2018. And of course, as my right honourable friends have pointed out, this was to enable those children to access a product that their families believed is the symptoms of their desperately difficult-to-treat conditions, the key there being if a prescriber deemed it clinically appropriate. And I know acutely, because I've spoken with campaigners and I've spoken with members of the all-party parliamentary group, that there is disappointment that the law change didn't relate to funding these products routinely on the NHS, which is, of course, and rightly, governed by a range of processes and procedures to ensure equitable distribution of funding, where it prioritises those medicines that have proven their safety, quality, efficacy and cost effectiveness. And that's why, coming back to the heart of this, and why I say the Honourable Lady representing the opposition front bench is right to push me, it's why research is absolutely essential. And I'll come on to talk about that a bit more in a moment. And the government has done all it can to remove legislative barriers, but it's now largely up to the cannabis industry to prove that their products are safe and effective for these children. Now, I will, of course. Yeah, of course.
Briefly, what you're saying there is if I can afford to pay for a private prescription, I can access a medicine which you're saying is not proven to be ethical, because you're not going to allow it into NHS. It has to go through other loops, has to pass other tests. What's the likes of Bedrocan, which has been manufactured out in the United Kingdom, so we don't have to import it from the Netherlands anymore, which the likes of Hilltop Leaf want to grow the product to help produce this product. The supply chain is already there for us, but you will not allow that to be prescribed, or you will not train GPs, or you will not give them the legal framework to work with them so they can actually prescribe that for children on the NHS. But if I can afford to buy it privately, I can buy it privately.
Well, the honourable gentleman raises a fair point, but he raised it as if this is something new or novel. It is not, and it is the case for all medicines in this country that they are either unlicensed or they are licensed. and they need to be licensed for use and prescription within the NHS, which means they've gone through both the MHRA and the NICE process, which proves that they are safe, that they are effective, and the NICE element that they are cost effective, and that is the difference here. Now, the cost effective, but the cost effective is in relation to NICE. Well, the reason I talk about the why it's important that the cannabis industry step up and prove their products are safe and effective, I didn't talk about cost effective. I'm talking about safe and effective because that element is the MHRA. That is the bit that, and let's not forget, many of these cannabis-based companies are multinational companies. They're not telling me that they can't afford to go through the same process that any other pharmaceutical company can and has done in order to get their products to be prescribed through the NHS. So part of it is research, part of it is those companies stepping up and proving that their products are safe and effective for those children, but more generally through the MHRA process. Now, my right honourable friend talked about... of course I will. We've got time.
I'm just curious, because what we've done is...
The honourable gentleman, in making his intervention, can return to parliamentary language. I am not participating in this debate at all. The honourable gentleman referred to you in his last intervention. I'd be grateful if he could return to normal language. Ronnie Cowan.
The Minister, you referred there to, and I've lost my thread there now, because what you were saying is that you are allowing a licence for a product to be manufactured in the United Kingdom, in East Kilbride. So that's okay. We're allowing it to be manufactured here in the United Kingdom. That's all right. What we're saying is you cannot get it on the NHS. So it's okay for other people to have it. So surely it's passed all the tests we need to test.
Sorry, I don't want to labour this point, Mr. Reid, but the point is it hasn't passed those tests. It's either a licensed product or an unlicensed product. And to be a licensed product, you have to go through the MHRA process. That is something that those products have not done to date. So yes, those products could be manufactured and they could be licensed, they're non-licensed, so they could be prescribed privately at the risk of the doctor, the general practitioner, private. But in order for a licensed product to be prescribed, let me rephrase that, for a product to be prescribed on the NHS, it would need MHRA and NICE approval. Now, there are some exceptions to that because the law was changed in 2018, and I think this is what my right honourable friend was referring to by a specialist doctor, or for some very specific conditions. And my right honourable friend asked why only 3 prescriptions have been. I didn't know that was the exact figure, but I will check on that. Regardless, actually, it sounds like it's a very low figure. I suspect the reason for it is that the decisions are taken on the doctor's own risk, and I suspect that general practitioners, there is reticence on their part to prescribe an unlicensed product that has not gone through the MHRA and NICE process.
That's my friend give way on that. I'm grateful to him. Yes, I think he's probably right, but I'm sure when he looks at this again, he'll also want to have a look at the NICE guidelines that apply, because they are at the moment extremely restrictive, and therefore the level of risk to an individual doctor in making a decision to prescribe will be perceived as much higher if the NICE guidelines appear to be deterring such prescription. So there are many elements to this. He's right to say that, but one of them is how much we encourage doctors to believe that this is the right thing to do. And again, I go back to the point I was making. There is some logical dissonance here. We have said already that it's right to reschedule these particular products as far as the Home Office is concerned. We are starting to see prescriptions in the NHS, but we are not seeing the number of prescriptions that really ought to be there in order to benefit the maximum number of patients.
We've not been short of time this afternoon. Every honourable member has had the opportunity to speak, but interventions should be brief and to the point. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Stringer. My right honourable and learned friend again makes a good point, and I've looked and again, meeting with the members of the APPG, it's very hard not to be moved and want to do all in our power to bring about the change that people want to see. And I've looked at calls to change NICE guidelines. The NICE guidelines have recently reviewed the best the base around these products and these guidelines. That they are unlikely to change, I'm afraid, until the evidence base develops, and the evidence base develops through clinical trials and evidence. So that's why I say all roads lead back to building an evidence base and a clinical trials base, and I'll come on to that, because I think that is probably the crux of this debate, because in January the NIHR issued guidance recommending that the NHS prescribe cannabidiol to patients with a rare seizure-causing genetic disorder, and this is, I believe, the 5th condition for which cannabis-based treatment has been approved by regulators and offered to NHS patients in England. And I understand it's also available in and approved in Scotland and Northern Ireland. And I also understand the NHS now funds thousands of these items, of these medicines each year. Now, I mentioned earlier, and I'm not sponsored by them, but it just happens to be that they're the manufacturer and provider that I've visited, Jazz Pharmaceuticals. You know, they are a good example of trailblazers in this space, of creating and not only just creating, but undertaking the research, the manufacturing, and the licensing, keep up licensing of cannabis-based medicine. So they've shown what can be done. So the key very much is in the research. Now, my right honourable friend mentioned consistency and coherence in policy, and that's why it's key that we do treat cannabis-based products in the way that we would any other medicinal product that we would want to prescribe on our NHS. Now, there is, of course, an economic case as well, not one that drives the government. My whole aim in this is what is right for our NHS and patients. But, of course, I'm aware that there is huge hope and patient demand for access to medicinal cannabis, and that it's been claimed that it can be helped with an array of medical conditions, from chronic pain to anxiety, and I know there's research underway, I believe, at the moment on how cannabis-based products might be able to help with psychosis, and I very much hope that those trials are successful. That is the right approach. Now, to date, much of the evidence suggesting cannabis could be an effective medical treatment is anecdotal or observational, and as I mentioned earlier, only in in fact a handful of conditions have enough clinical trials been done to prove scientifically that the drug is safe and effective. However, of course, I'm acutely aware that there are thousands of patients that now pay to access these unlicensed products on private prescriptions. And I also know, having spoken with campaigners and members of the APPG, that some patients believe that funding cannabis on the NHS will reduce overall healthcare costs by alleviating symptoms such as the extent that hospital visits and other treatments are ultimately reduced. And I understand that, and I hear that case. However, and again, apologies for labouring the point, but I have to keep coming back to it. Before any new medicine can be proved as cost-effective, it must be proven as safe and clinically effective. That is why research is so essential. Now, the honourable lady, the front bench for the opposition, asked what steps we're taking. And this is challenging because it is a pioneering area of research. But following collaborative work with clinicians and patient representatives, the NIHR and NHS England have confirmed support for 2 clinical trials into early onset and genetic generalised epilepsy. And Mr. Stringer, if you'll permit me, I'd love to use this debate and this opportunity this afternoon to highlight a tender opportunity that will be launched by the University College London in the next few weeks. So UCL are seeking a supplier to assist in a world-first randomised controlled trial comparing cannabis-based medicines that contain CBD and THC in the treatment of drug-resistant epilepsies in adults and children. And I hope that this tender process is successful and UCL finds a commercial partner to supply products for the trial so they can commence as soon as possible. Now, of course. Yeah,
on that issue of trials, I'm just wondering if the Minister, or myself, I've got 3 kids, I've got 2 grandkids, if one of them was suffering from something like intractable epilepsy and I had them on Bedrocan, and therefore they were either seizure-free or certainly under control, I would not want to hand them over to a random control test where they might be fed a placebo and therefore incur more damage. Would the Minister?
Well, and that is a very difficult question to answer. And what we do need is people to take part in clinical trials. Clinical trials are the answer to so many of the challenges that we face in the health sphere, and it's the way that we build that evidence base. Now, I don't know what that particular study will involve in terms of the detail, in terms of potential for a placebo, but what I will do is put the honourable gentleman in touch with with UCL and those who are looking to run that trial, so they can give him a level of comfort and reassurance. But I think on his point more generally, I think one of the biggest risks is that industry don't engage with this tender process. So I hope, notwithstanding my honourable friend's point, that all right honourable and honourable members here today will help me by amplifying my call for the cannabis industry to come forward and engage with this pioneering and world-first research. Now, I have also committed to a roundtable with the all-party parliamentary group, and I certainly invite all right honourable and honourable members chamber today to attend that too, because it's very important that we hear all of the issues. But in closing, Mr. Stringer, I'd like to once again thank my right honourable friend for securing a really important debate, and I look forward to engaging with him and members from all sides of this House on this issue. I am, to the honourable lady's point, absolutely committed to better determine why the cannabis industry is not, in the way that so many other pharmaceutical companies do, invest in the routine research required to prove that their products are safe and effective. And I will, of course, explore how best to engage with industry on this issue. And until then, I implore companies to explore supplying their products to the UCL clinical trials. As I said, they will be a world first. They will give us the evidence that we need to determine if these products should be funded within the NHS. I wish them every success. I genuinely hope that they do provide that evidence base. And on the matters concerning the cultivation and licensing of cannabis and cannabis-based products, I will, of course, as I promised my right honourable friend, raise that with my counterpart, the Minister for Crime, Policing and Fire, but I know he will champion this cause too. But I would like to thank all right honourable and honourable members for their contributions to this afternoon's debate.
David Mundell to wind up.
Thank you, Mr. Stringer, and I feel that we've had a very useful debate, and a debate in which, because like you, as Mr. Stringer, I chair these sessions, and it's extremely good to get half an hour from the Minister rather than 5 minutes. And although it wasn't necessarily comfortable for him, we were able to cover a lot of ground. And I think that he did, maybe whether deliberately or otherwise, come back to one of the issues that I raised, and that was the need for coordination within government in respect to this issue. And the honourable gentleman from Inverclyde, I think, led out the list of government departments with an interest in this matter, and I'm sure there are others that were missed, such as the Cabinet Office, to my right honourable friend's former bailiwick with the law officers. There is a need for coordination, and I don't think he was saying it, but I don't think we can push back to the industry and say, well, actually, it's your job to coordinate all these different bits in government. I think the industry needs to have a clear conduit to government to discuss and engage on these issues. And I fully understand, having been a minister myself, that you can't commit the Home Office certainly of all departments. You can't commit the Home Office, but we know how government operates, but we need to have a coordinated approach with which the industry can engage. And of course, he's right that this should not be economically driven in terms of the clinical decisions. But we've already made the decision, as my right honourable friend from Kenilworth and Southam said, that we're not debating whether this should be done. We have that decision has been made, and now we want to do this on a basis that not only benefits the patients, but is also beneficial for the economy of the United Kingdom. And it's always poignant, and the Honourable Member from Strangford is particularly good in any debate, actually, that he participates in, bringing it down to the personal level of individual examples. And I thank him for doing that today, and also my right honourable friend from Kenilworth and Southam. I've had the pleasure of meeting Alfie's mother myself in my constituency. She's a very, very powerful advocate. But I don't believe, and I don't think anybody who's taken part in this debate, believes that the pain and suffering of anybody should be the requirement for us to do the right thing. I was remiss, Mr. Stringer, in my own opening remarks not to reference the APPG, because I've engaged with them, and particularly the members for Gower and Edinburgh West, who are again strong advocates in relation to these matters. And although I didn't agree with everything that the honourable gentleman from Inverclyde said, which is often the case, what I did admire particularly, and I think came across in this debate, was his passion for this this subject, and it is held by many members over across the House. So I welcome the opportunity that we've had to air the issues. I welcome the Minister's fulsome and well-intentioned response. But we do need to see action, and I think, I reiterate the principal ask in it is that we have coordination within government in order to take this forward, and we're not requiring both those in the industry and those lobbying for patient interests to have to manage across a wide scale of government departments. I think that is one doable ask that could flow from today's debate, and I hope that it will. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered the economic contribution of medicinal cannabis. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting stands adjourned.
Ended. The proceeding has 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 ended. The proceeding